Hello, my friends. Welcome. I'm sorry I didn't get to see you in class today, but today we talked about sensation. And since we are being neurobiologists, we want to consider the what sensation is and how it enters our brain. So we want to think about what is sensation, what is transduction of sensory information, and how do sensations get our attention. So that's what we're looking at today. Here we go. All right, sorry about that. Moving on. So the question is, what is sensation and how would you define it? And the definition that we're looking for is that any information that comes into our brains through our five senses. When I say sensation, as a neurobiologist, you need to think about the five senses: taste, touch, smell, hearing, and sound. Hearing and sight. Sorry. This is our window to the world. Everything that we know, everything we receive comes from sensation. For example, you can see this really awesome picture of David Bowie as the Goblin King in the Labyrinth, and he was so awesome that he found Waldo when he was a baby. Still a baby. That joke hopefully permeated through your sensation of sight. So most of our sensory information we actually ignore. So the question we have to consider is what actually gets the attention of our senses. That's an important thing to think about. And so we need to start by thinking about the stimulus, the actual event or activity that evokes a reaction from us. We also need to consider our reaction, that physical reaction to a specific stimulus or situation. And this is kind of a circle. We recognize the stimulus, we respond to it, there's another stimulus, and there's another response. And so our senses are kind of always working in this loop. And sensation is important not just to neurobiology, but to behaviorism and cognitive psychology, because a lot of what they look at is how we respond to stimulus in our environment. Another thing to think about is, what do we expect from a stimulus? We call that set. A set is something we've come to expect from a stimulus. So I might ask you, for example, what do you think of when I mention going to a movie theater? You might talk about the popcorn, you might talk about the cold temperature, the dark, hanging out with friends, watching a movie. Of course, some people really don't like movie theaters, so you might have some negative thoughts there too, the crowding, the noise that you might have to deal with. But we already have, when I say movie theater, we already have a set, some sort of expectation based on that stimulus. We can also think about attention. What do we tend to focus on? What are our likes or dislikes? If a stimulus appeals to our likes or our dislikes, we tend to focus on it a little more. So I asked my students to look and tell me what was the very first thing they saw in the picture that I'm about to reveal to you here. And of course, the first thing was candy. So I said, okay, go a little deeper. And I got different answers. For example, a lot of people focused on the lollipop. Right here, they said that it was right in the middle. A couple kids said it was red, which they really like the color red, so that caught their attention. Some students said that they saw the Tootsie Roll, and it's dark against all these bright colors, so that made it stand out. A lot of kids saw the Reese cups because of the bright orange packaging, but also several people said because there were so many of them, it was just an overwhelming color. We noticed that Almond Joy did not get a whole lot of love. And when I asked my students why Almond Joy wasn't one of the first things they saw, a lot of kids said things like, I'm allergic to almonds or coconut. I don't like Almond Joy. I don't like coconut. So we kind of noticed that what we were attracted to are the things we like, the things that interest us. But, for example, one person said she saw the Reese cup first because she has a peanut allergy and she has to worry about things she can't eat. So when you're paying attention, sometimes your dislikes can be as important as your likes in terms of how it grabs your attention. So then we told a story here. I told the students a story about how they're walking home from school one day when a large dog jumps out at you from behind a tree. He starts to growl and show his teeth. You quickly turn around and walk in the opposite direction. So we were practicing what is stimulus, what is set, what is response to the stimulus. So the stimulus, we decided was the growling and showing of teeth by the dog. A lot of people said, well, if I saw a dog, I wouldn't be that upset, but it was growling and showing its teeth. So that's really what we're responding to. And I asked, well, why? What does that mean, growling and showing teeth? Oh, well, it could mean that, the dog's going to bite me, or that the dog is being aggressive. So we found the set that we already had when we noticed a dog doing that. And then I asked students, what is your response? Some people said that they would fight. And by fight, I don't mean actually fight the dog, but they would meet the challenge of the dog. So maybe they'd pet the dog or try to make friends with it, or try to calm it somehow, or show, who was dominant. Some people said they would flee, get away as quickly as they could. A lot of people pointed out you don't run from a dog, but you might back away as quickly as possible. And some people said they'd freeze. They'd wouldn't know what to do, and they'd just stand there and be petrified. And so we talked about our sympathetic system there, how we saw fight, flight, or freeze going on. So the other thing we talked about is how much of a stimulus do you need to have in order for it to get your attention? Because as I said, the majority of sensations just pass us by. We do not pay attention to them. And so what we noted is there is a line, and at this line, if there's any sensation below that line, we're not going to notice it. And that's the absolute threshold. So it denotes the minimum amount of stimulus that you can experience 50% of the time. Anything below that is what's referred to as subliminal. And we'll note, if you've ever taken a marketing course, you'll note that advertisers love using subliminal messaging, things we don't realize we're picking up on. But for example, taste. You might want to know, what's the smallest amount of salty or sweet or sour that you can actually taste in a dish? And so we talked about an experiment that you can do. It's considered normal if you can taste a teaspoon of sugar in 2 gallons of water. So I offered this experiment that students can try with 2 gallons of water, 1 gallon of water, and a cup of water. You make all 3 of these, and then you add a teaspoon of sugar and dissolve it in thoroughly in all cases, and you see what you can taste. And they have noticed that there is a correlation between people who cannot taste the sugar in the 2 gallon or 1 gallon mixture and an increased risk of diabetes. So that's just kind of an interesting correlation, not causation, remember. Correlation meaning a relationship. And I myself cannot taste that teaspoon of sugar in anything more than a cup. So, and unfortunately, diabetes runs in my family. So it's kind of good news for me, information for me to have to say, okay, that's something I need to watch. We also talked about how you might test yourself by hearing. What is the quietest your CD or iPod or whatever you have can be before you can't hear it anymore? So you can go a certain distance and have someone lower it until you can't hear. That would be the absolute threshold of sound. All right, so moving on. We talked about how do sensations actually get into your brain. I mean, it's not like these sensations are, it's not like you actually open up your head and stick stuff in there, right? For example, let's say you take a sip of your favorite beverage, your favorite drink. The liquid doesn't go in there, but you can tell if the drink is warm or cold. You can tell if there's carbonation. Is it sweet? Is it a little less sweet? You can tell these things. And the question is, how? Because if you think about it, don't try this at home, but if you were to take a cup of water and pour it on a laptop or a device, it would short out, right? Because of the electricity. Again, don't try this at home. I don't want to hear from your family how you did that, but we can imagine. Well, same thing. If you were to be able to open your head and pour the water on your brain, it would do the same because our brains are electrical, just like a laptop or a device. What about when we see a picture of our best friend? We have that image up here, but it's not like the picture actually physically goes into our brain, right? Or let's say you go to see Star Wars with someone and you see Rey's lightsaber and you say it's blue and they say it's turquoise. How come there's that difference? And you saw the same stimulus. How come you don't both agree on it? And the answer to this is the concept of transduction. Transduction is all about, I'm trying to trying to grab myself here and move myself down. Transduction is all about changing the sensory information into neural impulses. So just like a computer has to have electrical impulses to be able to read what's going on, our brains need electrical impulses to be able to read the sensory information. And so transduction is the process of taking the physical stimuli from the environment and changing it into an electrical message that the brain can understand and interpret. And so this is a very important thing. Again, how do we feel that liquid on our tongue? Well, we have to have the nerve send the information to the brain and say, hey, guess what this is? And the brain comes back and says, oh, yeah, we like that. That's good. And it depends on the sense involved, but the information has to go through sometimes multiple steps, sometimes just one step, to get to the thalamus and then be routed to its final destination. Now, imagine for a moment you have a favorite song. If not a favorite song, a favorite group, or a song you just really, really, really like. So I asked my friends, how did you feel the first few times you listened to it? And I got answers like, oh, I was pumped, or it was so exciting, or some people said, I was sad, but it was good because it helped me to feel better when it was done, or it related to me. And that first couple times, that's just so magical. But then think about like after listening to it 100 times. It's probably still a good song, but it may be that maybe you have a little bit less of a reaction to a more muted reaction. So instead of being like, yeah, you're like, oh yeah, I like that song, yay. So this is the process of sensory adaptation. We can get used to sensations over time, and we have a decreased responsiveness. Now, I am not giving you permission not to listen to your mom, okay? Be clear, or dad, or whomever. But that is often why we don't hear when someone close to us calls us or asks us to do something. It's less that we're being rude and more that we've just gotten used to the sensation of hearing them. This still doesn't excuse you from answering if your mom calls your name, but it's just important to know that that's something that you can be aware of. So we become so used to that sight or sense or taste, smell, or touch that we adapt to it over time. An example I was using is my mouse. I don't even realize I'm touching it half the time. I'm just so used to touching it and clicking that I don't even pay attention when I do it because I have that sensory adaptation. All right, so moving along, I gave everyone a Google Doc and I asked them to find information. So I'm going to click through some slides here, excuse me. We worked on this as a class. I'm going to show you that I actually have the answers in here for you because I'm that kind of awesome. So I asked you to look at like trichromatic theory. Trichromatic theory is a theory of color vision that says we have 3 cones, red, green, and blue, and every color we see is some version of these colors. But the problem with that is it's really simple, but it's also doesn't explain things like after images. Like, when you stare at something and then you look away and you see the reflection, it's like slightly different colors, but you see the same thing on a white, background. That's an after image or color blindness. Trichromatic theory doesn't explain these, which is why we go to opponent process theory. And this says that every cone is paired with another cone. So when one cone has been used and really stimulated and is fatigued, like they've been running a long distance, the other one fires an opposite color to like calm it down. So it's like if one cone, if a person's running, they're like, they get to the finish line and then someone's like fanning them and okay, take some deep breaths, get you some water. Let's get you cooled down. That's what's going on. So the cone that's been really stimulated, it's like the runner. And the cone that's trying to help it relax, the opposite is like the one fanning it. Instead, it's just flashing the other color to try and help it calm down. So opponent process theory helps us with after images and other visual phenomena. How is smell transduced? Interestingly enough, until this year, what we always spoke about was how smell was not transduced. But recently, it has been decided in neurobiology that smell is transduced. It's just transduced very quickly. It goes into the olfactory bulb in our brain, it's processed, and then it goes straight into the thalamus. So that's why smell is so good at bringing back memories. Sound, on the other hand, it has to go through the cochlea, it has to be transduced, then it goes into the thalamus. So it takes longer for sounds, sight, touch, and taste to be transduced. All right, I'm going to move on from these last questions, but they are here, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in the next class. So hopefully you were able to get some good